Welcome to the Exponentially Me podcast. Have you ever wondered if we can work better, if we get along better, and if leaders can really influence that? In this podcast, these are some of the questions we will be answering. We'll be talking to some amazing people from all around the world, not just thinkers on this, but the doers, giving you practical information that can make you a better colleague and even a better leader. Hi, I'm Mick Sindval. I came across this idea by John Dewey that talks about education not being the thing that prepares us for life, but that which is life itself. Well, if you listen to Tsitsi Mutendi, she talks about how family business in Africa teaches us about how connections really work and how that can be good or bad for business. Well, she worked in Zimbabwe before she moved to Johannesburg, where she specialized in building multi-generational family wealth. She's currently building brands that include a Montessori primary school in Harare and a network to link family businesses together. It's interesting how family businesses in Africa also work differently than you might expect. How do you generate cross-generational wealth when a family would like to dissipate the money between them? What are the challenges you face? Well, she starts by telling us about her work helping families discover their core motivations, their history that they share, and the values that they share. We do spend quite a bit of time talking about the clash of legal and cultural norms, and culture sometimes eats legal for breakfast. And why do things look different in Africa? Why is family still such a wonderful part of a business and connection? Please tell us about how it is important to think about the broader social questions, about what is in the conversations, the parts that we play and the parts we aren't. We then look a little bit into who do we really trust and who not. Well, let's hear from Tsitsi. To start off with, tell us a little bit more about what you do with African businesses and family businesses.
The work that I do is around governance. So governance is most people when they hear it, they're thinking corporate governance. It's almost the same, only it's only applicable in a family setup where we sit down as a family, whoever you consider part of your core family, and we start having conversations around who we are. So as a family, what is our agreed understanding of our history? Where do we come from? And who is part of the family? And what did they do? What significant contribution do they bring to the table? And why do we have certain traditions and certain ways of doing things in the family? Where do they emanate from? So that shared history brings us together. And while we are talking about bringing us together, we're saying, right, we've identified where we're coming from. We identified some of the values and understanding what values are. What are the things that are non-negotiable within our family? And what are the things where we feel like the rules can be bent a bit, or they are nice to haves, or they are something that we want to become. And once we identify those things, we can then as a group say, where are we going to as a family? Which is completely different from for business families, because most families, we don't think there's a need to sit down and identify what is a vision as a family and things like that. We have a vague understanding of our history, a vague understanding of our values. And so thinking about the vision for the future, well, everybody's doing their own thing. We just know the traditions that keep us together. Within a business family, however, it's very important to have a shared vision, or a vision that everybody is aware of, is aligned with, and can contribute towards, because your family owns a financial vehicle, which is the business. And that financial vehicle brings in your livelihood at times and allows you to live the life you're accustomed to. So being able to understand that this financial vehicle needs a driver and the family is the driver. And no matter who's leading the family at any point in time, we should have agreed on where the driver is taking this vehicle. We're passengers in the car, but where's the driver taking us? Because you definitely don't want a driver who's been smoking a lot, drinking a lot, and is just have no clue where you're going, jumping into the driver's seat and saying, "Hi guys, we're going." Where are we going? And so when there's alignment, even if a chosen driver cannot fulfill the purpose, or you need to change the tires, or you need to fuel up the car, you all know where the destination is. So you know how much fuel to put in the car. You know what type of tires you're going to need. You know how to sustain the vehicle so that it fulfills the journey. And you know when you need to change the vehicle or upgrade the vehicle. So I help families put it into perspective. We sit down, we have family meetings, we start aligning, we start speaking a similar language. So I'm more of a conductor of an orchestra. And once the orchestra can play a symphony, I can step back and allow them to do what they do.
And so how does that differ from, in your experience, between European families and family businesses by comparison to African?
So African family businesses are quite complex. I think primarily from my experience, two things. First thing has definitely got to be the culture. African cultures are very embedded within each other. It's almost like you cannot separate a person from the culture. It's almost, you are born to be a part of the land in Africa. So it's almost like it's nature. You're part of nature. You are part of the land. And as you are born into the family and you're welcomed by the group, you become part of the land. And so when we have family businesses in Africa, yes, business has always been there in the form of trade in the past, or in the form of maybe a chosen vocation or skill that families have had. But with the changing times and also with the different movements that have happened on the continent, where we have new legal systems that came with colonialism, then the amendment of some of these legal systems that came with independence, and having to rethink who we are as a people in Africa sometimes has sometimes muddled up some of the things that African family businesses can and can't do. And primarily, when you look at family governance from an African family's perspective, it's very difficult for you to do the governance without considering the cultural heritage of the family, because being a part of the land and being a part of nature, I think we've all heard the African fable of the hippo and the scorpion who wanted to cross the river. And the hippo said, "No, I can't carry you because you will sting me." And the scorpion said, "Well, I need you to carry me, otherwise we'll die." And then once they got into the water, what does the scorpion do? It stings the hippo. And the hippo says, "Why did you sting me?" And the scorpion says, "It's my nature." Mm-hmm. And the hippo then dives deep into the water. And the scorpion is like, "But you're drowning me. Why did you drown me?" And the hippo said, "It's my nature." So nature at times can really trump every other mitigating circumstance. So understanding what the nature is and being able to create a governance system that is unique to the family and the natural flow of the culture, the traditions of the family is always better suited.
What do you think if we think of family businesses in general in Europe, without touching on the work of stuff like Percy Huygens has done, the general perception here is that you have somebody there that a person that had an idea, got some money together, got some investments going. First line of investment is usually your triple F investment, so your fools, family, and friends, and then after they get external investors and bank loans and everything else, and you start growing the business. So from that point on, it's in essence a single person, and then anybody that gets shares into that family, into that business, are external shareholders or family members. Usually family members are second generation or third generation, because the shares are centered around one person, one founder or two founders, and then the next level, the next generation down, is actually when it starts becoming a bit more diffuse, and then the shareholders start becoming more family members. Even though they might have been family members right from the beginning, invested in their time and effort and being directors, it's not always equity. But how is equity in family business in Africa then distributed? Because it sounds like it's different.
I think it boils down to the family itself. So we can't disregard the fact that there is the nuclear family as well as the larger family in the context of Africa. I'll give an example of myself and my husband. We have built businesses, and we expect our children to inherit these businesses, and then their children to inherit or make use of the financial advantages of having these businesses. However, within the context of Ubuntu, there is then that want to share the wealth and make sure that the larger family also benefits from the prosperity that I have. And I think this happens across cultures, where you start employing family members and extended family members. However, it's always very clear in terms of ownership that the business belongs to myself, my husband, and our children. That has never been something that is questioned within our cultural context or within our everyday legal context. However, it becomes very lopsided. For example, I have daughters. If my family business belongs to my culture is very patriarchal. So it favors the male over the female. So my daughters, once they get married, you've had people who feel like, I cannot give my daughters shares in the business or give them any sort of ownership in the business because they get married, they take on someone's name. I'm not giving my business to somebody else's family or somebody else's totem and the like. So it becomes very much that the son must inherit. This in itself has its own problems, because at the same time now we have this modernization of our societies where there's equity, and the legalities and the societal norm is that all children are equal. But the cultural norm is dictated to a certain extent by that my surname is not carried on with my female heir. And as a woman, for example, I use my husband's surname, but anything that I built belongs to my husband's family because it carries his surname. It no longer belongs to my father's family. And for example, when my father passed away, I was one of his older children. I was the one who was appointed the executor of his estate, which is quite odd because I was female and married. His family would normally culturally not allow me, especially in a family council, to have a say as long as I'm female and married, because I am, to a certain extent, although I belong to my father's family, I am married. And anything that I then touch that belongs to my father's family is then considered to belong to my husband's family or the in-laws, and the in-laws are considered outsiders. So there was a bit of a hullabaloo in the communal side of the conversation, where people were saying, why are his sons not stepping up? why is the daughter doing all this? She is not a legitimate heir. She should not have a legitimate voice at our councils because she is married. Anything she says is almost like an outsider, which is her husband's family, is now wanting to play the law in our home. So you have to truly understand the cultural aspect of it. And unfortunately, my dad hadn't put in place any legalities or anything that would protect me as a female heir, or that would protect my sister, who's also female heir. Neither, in fact, he didn't have anything in place. So I had to look to the benevolence of my brothers because they had a say in the family council in my birth home. They had a say in the family council, so they could stamp the approval of, we are allowing her to take the initiative. We're allowing her to manage the wealth. We're allowing her to manage the estate. She will report to us. The Greater Family Council, however, was disgruntled. They were like, you are letting a woman, firstly, speak in our family council, and she's a married woman, so that means her husband is speaking and not her. So they already see me as my husband, and that can be a problem. Let's say a sudden death happens. We came from a pandemic. People don't put family governance and estate planning at the top of the list, although death and taxes are the most inevitable things in life. We tend to want to pretend like they're not going to happen. And when they do happen, if we're caught with our pants down, it can get really messy. It happened to my dad. I saw it happening. And that's what led me into being very mindful of family businesses on the continent, because I felt we are losing our family businesses. We're not seeing continuation because there's something gravely wrong. And yes, it was the governance.
I think it's interesting. A friend of mine spoke to you yesterday. She was just telling about her sister in the US and how even there, where it was a different legal system, I mean, they work on precedent, so things have grown to be really, sometimes really strange. But there, every single contract in a family, if you have a pension plan, that is originally when you're married to the person and then you get divorced, you create a settlement and it's already bought off and all the rest of it. But if the person remains on there as a beneficiary, you get all kinds of trouble later if the person that has insurance dies. And then all the normal legal structures don't really sort of tie in with each other. And when I look at the Netherlands, I'm actually quite glad I live here, is because I know that the law has been revamped over the last 30 years so much. And we have a civil code, so it's basically just criminal code, civil code, and everything is in there. And the law is quite clear on how things are done. So if there's something like in the UK, you will get precedent on precedent. So here's an original law. Then there was a jury that had a decision, and then there was another decision. And so the way that the law grows, this might not be its original intention, but it might be applied in different ways now. And so it creates these different sort of cultures within that. And then you were also talking about succession and for instance, multiple children. It reminds me of stuff that happened in Ireland, where in even up till the 19th century, in early parts of the 20th century, you had families and women basically had no rights. I mean, the whole emancipation of women, basically the whole suffragette movement and all those kind of things, a lot of that was not present in the 19th century. So, and it sounds like that, sort of like men making decisions and women are only as good as their dowry, and you come over with your money, and then after that, your husband has all the say. And what about your children? And in Ireland, for instance, in the early part, or in the 19th century, actually, there was this, because of the huge Catholic span across the population, and birth control being something that was not really ranking really high. You had a population explosion, so loads and loads of children, and at the same time, a law that said you had to basically spread the wealth equally amongst your children. So you ended up, before the potato famine, you ended up with these small parcels of land, and potatoes was one of the few things that could still support families on that. And the moment the potato blight came in, the moment the potatoes couldn't be farmed anymore, grain and everything else was not sustainable. So you had large parts of the population starving. And I'm just wondering, to what extent are these kind of weird skewnesses, right, and conflicts between different legal systems playing its role in currently in Africa?
I think it plays a big part because still kind of going back to the story of my dad's estate. Sometimes we walk in ignorance because, well, need has not gotten us to look for what needs to be done. As children, you see people pass on, you attend the funeral, they're buried, and you think that's the end of that. As an adult, when you face the death of a loved one, you start slowly realizing there's admin. And admin goes across the fact that the mourning process in itself is acknowledging that a person was with us and they're no longer there. And you take their mortal remains and you bury them because you can't keep them in your lounge. It just wouldn't work out too well for anybody concerned. So unless they're cremated, you have to take them to a resting place. But the shock of the system is the moment your loved one passes, the government and its agencies, which would be funeral parlors and everyone in between, takes the mortal remains and keeps them for you while you get the paperwork done. So you are all of a sudden given car keys, you're given cell phones, the clothes they were wearing, everything is handed over to you. And from there has to be legal precedence because the person lived. You have a birth certificate, you have a death certificate. If anything happens in the middle there that the law is not quite sure about, there could be a lot of arrests that will happen because if they issued a birth certificate, they're going to issue a death certificate. And so when my dad died, so it was my first time going through the legal process, as well as going through the mourning process and the actual process of realizing that, oh, the keys to his house, the keys to everything, they're like, oh, you're his children. There they are. You're like, oh, okay. So it's almost like, I don't know if you've watched these apocalyptical movies where people are sitting having breakfast and the next moment there's steaming cups of coffee and everything, but there's just no people. That's the same type of experience. All of a sudden, that person is no longer there and you have to connect the dots. And some of the laws that had changed in my country is that back when we had common law, I remember my mom being very adamant of the fact that you need to get married to have your Chapter 37 legal marriage that protects you and your kids and your assets. And so people at the time really pushed to get these legal marriages because they knew it protected them. But with the changing of the laws, especially in Zimbabwe, they acknowledge your traditional marriages in the same way they acknowledge the legal marriage. So the laws changed to acknowledge both these marriages to also protect those women who had husbands who didn't want to do the legal marriage because they thought they were going to lose control of assets. And it took it a step further. At some point, they and I think this still applies. If one of the spouses is cohabiting with another person for a certain period of time, that person is considered a legal spouse. So the laws then also touch on that. And when we went to the Master of High Court wanting to clear up my dad's estate, one of the things they ask before they can appoint an executor is to ask, how many children did the deceased have? So that means even children you did not know about will be considered by the law. The law is about equity. It doesn't consider emotion, neither does it consider everything else in between. It's equity. How many children did the deceased have? And how many of those are minors? So they will put precedence on minors because the estate must look after minors. And then it will consider the fact that when you're wrapping up the estate and making sure that if there was a will, it's taken in consideration. If there is no will, you have to come together as a family, where family governance plays a big role. You have to sit down and agree on what is going to happen to the estate of the deceased. That's where culture can play a big part, as well as legal can play a very big part. And they will give certain leeways, like real estate may be awarded to the spouse in situ if they're sitting in a household. And that house may go to that person if it was in the deceased name. And also they want to have everybody sign off. So all these things didn't apply in the past. Like, people could do them and they could have a whole argument about it and sort it out from a cultural perspective. Now the law plays its hand. It wants to know who gets what and why, and they want their fair share as the state. So you find that those changes have impacted us. There's certain legalities, if you don't know about them, can really knock your business or your family. And at times it could leave, I know people sometimes set up trusts and they think we can hide around trusts, and they put in their trustees without really knowing the functions of what can go wrong. And I always say, if you're going to do something, don't look at the bright side, because you know what? We know all the pros on most things. Look at all the cons first and make sure you test them rigorously, because those are what's going to cause the most damage.
Absolutely. I think also when it comes to contracts, sometimes I'm a little bit hard-nosed in making sure that contracts are crisp and clear on its intent and what on the execution. People kind of, why are you putting so much emphasis on this? Like, we don't set up a contract to get married. We set up a contract to get divorced. So even if we think we may never get divorced, we need to have it in the paperwork so that it doesn't become ugly when there's a divorce. So it doesn't matter if it's a personal relationship or a work relationship, just have those things in place. That makes the transition so much easier.
All things are done with good intentions, most times at the beginning. It's the end. I mean, even the discussion we're talking about, what happens in transition, in death, what happens in succession when it comes the end of an era for one generation and the beginning for another. It's the end that always makes things technical. It's the end that we always have to prepare for. The end doesn't necessarily mean death. It just means that there is some sort of transition that means change. How are we going to handle the change? Who is going to handle the change? And how are we going to make it a less bumpier road? I mean, like, even when you see they're grading roads and making them smooth. So before they put on the tar and everything, so that when you drive on it, you feel like, wow, this road is brilliant. But a lot of work has gone to preparing for the end, the smooth road.
I think it's something I spoke to Percy about is he is not just about the transition, but also the vision of family businesses. And that is that when we normally think of family businesses, there's a few things I don't think all of us know. And that is that family businesses tend to have a long-term view. The average business will look at the next quarter, the next shareholder meeting, the next profit declaration, and usually say all these things are filed quarterly. So if you're a listed company, quarterly, quarterly, quarterly. But the moment it's a family business, it's not about this quarter; it's about this lifetime. And looking at 10 years ahead, will we have money to make sure the kids can all go to university or to school or things like that? So that the focus is not on always the here and now. Do you also see that in African family businesses?
Yes, absolutely. I think initially when we've gotten over as entrepreneurs, when we've gotten over the hurdle of, is this business going to make it and is it going to be profitable or not? You start thinking about legacy. What is the product or service that I've brought to the market? And how is it helping the people that I'm giving a solution to? And how will they remember my name going into the future? So very quickly after the profit question has been resolved, it becomes a legacy discussion. That's why there's that planning into the future, because it's like, I think in the past we've seen it where if the father is a farmer, the children will likely go into farming because that's the family trade. That's what the family is known for. So even if you look at the past in Africa, where if you had even the family names sometimes are derived from the skills that the family had or were known for. And it's that legacy discussion. Whereas in once you've realized that, oh, I can hunt and I can actually feed my people, you're now saying, I want to be known as the greatest hunter of all time. And I want my children to also be great hunters. And we start looking for those family members who can carry the discussion forward. We start planning ahead. And sometimes as family owners, family leaders, you do get the occasional James Bond leader who believes that only they can do it and no one else can. And unfortunately, when that happens, that can be very detrimental to the family business, because the continuity happens over time. Succession isn't when the leader is no longer there or can no longer function. Succession is when the leader teaches the next generation how to build the way that they built, but allows them also to bring in the technology, the new perspective, and takes it forward. And I think that's what generational is. Like, we can then, when we should do that shared history, we start reminiscing and saying, oh, you know, when Extine moved here, things were hard, but he soldiered on and he built this. And by the time I took over, this had already been done. And I also added to this and I did this. So there's that hero and that essence of, we are champions, we're made of sterner stuff, we do the hard things as a family, and we have pride. And so families fight for their names, for their pride, and for their skill.
So I'm wondering if you have that, it almost sounds like purposeful living in the way that millennials, these what we consider to be millennial values, is to find a purpose. And so families have this purpose, you know, and like research, we built on the shoulder of giants, you know, that's gone before us. We keep on building, you know. But now in Africa, we've had our giants, and we've had our European giants, and we've had our South American giants, and we've had our Chinese giants, and Southeast Asian giants. And with access to the internet, we all of a sudden have access to information that previously would not have been part of our little giant structure. And how are we now being influenced? Because I mean, if you look at Europeans, for instance, and Western world, in generally referred to, so for instance, the US and Europe, there's this perception of who Nelson Mandela was, and the perception of the value that he provided within the political context of South Africa and what we've learned from that. When you really go down to the perceived value and the feelings of connectedness, it's almost as if who he for me was, and in somebody that became almost like almost like you were saying earlier, the Baba, the father figure, in the country politics. He had almost that value, where it didn't matter what the color of your skin was. This was our father of our country. And we all felt that he brought us together, unified us. And it was an emotional connection. It wasn't just a logically reasoned through one. However, when we analyze what Nelson Mandela brought, we tend to look especially if we look from a Western world perspective, we try and see what he did and then try and analyze how can we emulate, instead of going for the feeling that was there, the connection. Do you see African family business also being more about the connection or more about the structure?
I think connection is very much an African thing. The reason why I say that is that if you look at our history in terms of our traditional beliefs, we believe in the essence of people, and we believe in how they made us feel. And it's almost like, I think you're from Africa, you know how palatable it is when you walk into a room, you feel welcome or unwelcome really quickly, because we are all about feelings. We're all about, and you have people who become giants within rooms. No pun intended, because Nelson Mandela was very tall. He had stature, but at the same time, he had presence. And I think in every generation, you will always find people who are going to have presence, people who are going to be giants among men, whether it's by sheer personality or by achievements. And on the African continent, a lot of the giants that have been forged before were giants who were fighting for the liberation of the Black people, for the liberation of their countries, for the ability to vote, for the ability to have equity. Now, we're going to have to look to different types of giants, different types of people who are going to capture our imagination and make us feel like we can do anything. And it's all going to be centered around family businesses, the empires that they build through the communities they give to, through philanthropy, through the products and services that they give, because we're now in a space where Africa is slowly going to grow into its own. It's going to have to find its own identity. And the next frontier is definitely economic. And who does economy if not family businesses? They contribute to the largest percentage of global GDP. So on the continent, these are the individuals who are going to be able to build companies that we're going to say, if it wasn't for this company or this innovation, we wouldn't be this far along. So we're going to get families that are going to be magnanimous in industry, just like we have seen globally and in the West, where initially it was the kings that went to war, that had their names etched through time and statues everywhere. But slowly, when we moved into industry, we started celebrating innovation, great industrialists who started setting the pace. And we continue to do so through places like Forbes, who give us the top 100 so-and-so who did what and what. In Africa, we're not too far behind. Those are going to be the conversations. It's going to be the individuals and their families and what they continue to do for the continent. And so we're no longer looking at the next greatness coming from the struggle, but it's going to come from the innovators, the industrialists, the people who are building and who are creating the change or the future that we want to see.
I think you've got a very good point there. If you something else I just want to add to that, and that is that if you look at countries like Germany, for instance, the majority of the businesses in Germany are small to medium businesses. It's not the big multinationals, you know. And the whole economy sort of thrives around that. And if you look at in Africa, there's all these small little businesses, small little entrepreneurs that are doing some really amazing stuff. And with things like M-Pesa and these kind of payment systems that have been brought into where you can pay with an SMS kind of thing and not have to worry about having an app and all the data requirements and all that kind of stuff. You can literally now buy something just across the border in another country and then bring it back to your village, because villagers and these smaller communities, country borders doesn't really mean anything when you're on the ground. If somebody's 100 meters away from you and they have their house there, he's your neighbor. It is not a neighboring country.
With the African Continental Free Trade Agreement that's been put in place, we're going to see a lot more of what you've just described start to happen. It's a process within itself, because people have to organize, people have to understand what it means and what has changed, and then start utilizing it. I mean, and you mentioned German businesses. I once had a conversation at a conference with this gentleman who spoke about how Germany used to, at some point after the world wars, they used to take wheelbarrows full of money to pay for bread. They were at their last. And they built that. And the small businesses you're talking about is called the Mittelstand. They realized that you can't have big corporates anchoring the economy, because if they collapse, you collapse the whole economy. But if you start empowering the family businesses and you allow them to build $1 million businesses, and yet they still remain family owned, family controlled, and they just don't become these big corporate monsters, you create a balance where everybody in the economy can earn money, can spend money, and you have the basic formula of economics: demand and supply.
I think in the Netherlands has always been on that side as well, in the sense of supply and demand, but the Netherlands has always been more commercially minded, I think, more in the trade side of things. I mean, you go back centuries, and the Dutch are just amazing traders. The Germans are great at manufacturing, and all those things are shifting and moving around. I mean, in the last 2 decades, things have shifted a lot. And I think that one of the things that I see happening, and especially because I'm coming from a different continent. I came here from Africa, and so for me, a certain way of being is connected. And when I came here, everybody is connected via the internet, living very disconnected lives, you know. And sort of, I don't know if you ever heard of a DJ called Armin van Buuren. And anyway, he's one of these trance DJs in the Netherlands, and he world famous, and apparently, and he's but he has this song that he conducted. He said, "Everybody's connected, but no one's connecting," and it just made me realize, well, you know, it sort of hammered it home for me that we take our connectedness in Africa for granted. And when we look further afield, we start seeing so many people breaking apart. I mean, one of the interesting cultural phenomena in Amsterdam, it's not necessarily for the rest of the Netherlands, but in Amsterdam, it's very sort of common to have a mum and a dad living in 2 separate houses. It's called living together apart. So dad will have his own apartment, mum will have her own apartment, and the kids sort of migrate between the two. They're happily married, but they have their own space. And it is something that, coming from an African perspective, this doesn't make sense to me.
You see the look on my face that went like...
And so we have these families that sometimes, but it's not just, some of them are really lovely people. And so, but what I see in business is that let me take a step back. Within business, when we look at empathy, I like to look at empathy from three different perspectives. One definition is cognitive empathy, which is our ability to see that somebody else is suffering. And it's also when we walk into a room, we sort of have a sense of what is the room, Then we have affective empathy, which is, do we care? Right? And then we have compassionate empathy, which is, are we willing to do? And if you cannot see, why would you be interested and why would you want to do something about it? And so what we tend to do in business in the Western world is we say you're not allowed to do anything. So don't show up with your emotions. So in essence, we're saying don't do because you shouldn't feel. And so we're teaching people to create a stressful scenario where they see and they see the pain and they want to engage and they want to do something about it because it's human nature to not want to see other people hurt. And then we say, but you're not allowed to. And so we're creating these really stressful scenarios in businesses which can be resolved by just creating a connection. And I'm wondering, what practical stuff can we take from Africa and say, here, do it like this. This is how you connect. You may have forgotten, but it's okay to give someone a hand and go like, I love you for who you are.
Yes. And I accept you for who you are.
Yes.
Not who I want you to be.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We really want to go there, right? How often is it that we want to change people from who they are, and can I just accept that they're complete and beautiful as they are?
And you know what? I'd like your take on this because I'm thinking from it from an African perspective. That from an African perspective, we usually are very accepting of people as they are. And the concept of making somebody change is not part of our culture. We don't even have words around that because we embrace what we see, what we receive, and it's just the way we are. I have not experienced a space in the African culture where you have been demanded to change who you are. Sometimes when the collective accepts you for who you are, the collective sometimes may actually change to accommodate you. And we've seen that in many scenarios where a stranger comes into the home and we create a meal for them because we feel like they cannot leave our home without eating, even when there is no food.
Mm.
But the collective creates space to allow the person who's come in to fit in, as opposed to a demand for the person to change. I hope that makes sense.
I think it does. The thing is, we also have things like homosexuality and transgenderism that there are some really big issues, I think, around in the African continent, but everywhere else as well. It's not just there. What I wonder sometimes is if it isn't the Judeo-Christian tradition that and the way that Western society had developed, especially in Europe, that was transplanted into Africa, that's created these conflicts. Because for me, I remember as like an 8-year-old kid, all right, even if I was a 6-year-old, you're so not thinking about who is what and who does what and what is proper and what isn't, that it was, for me on the farm, it was so wonderful because I would go sit there with the farm laborers on the farm, and I would just go sit next to the campfire and learning Setswana, and you spoke a common language, and you could call it gossip on one perspective about what had happened on the day, but it was also sometimes a humorous reflection, a way of dealing with the stresses of life, but shared experience. So you share something, you go like, and you make it funny, or it might be sad, and you have all these emotions at play. It's one moment you're laughing, and the next moment you're all going like, yeah, that was painful, and everybody just living with each other on this emotional level. And when you have that, and then you go to this cold shower of, keep away, it is a really strange thing to experience.
I completely hear you. And looking at it and some of the things you mentioned, I'm just thinking maybe the exploration of the conversation shouldn't be. I know Africa has been criticized that we're non-accepting of certain social changes that have been accepted in the West. But the question is, if it's something that is nature, is it that we are non-accepting of it? Or has it always been accepted, but just not discussed? Because we know, if you live on the continent, that there's certain things that are seen, but not discussed because you don't want to make the next person uncomfortable. And at the same time, you don't want to muddy the waters.
Mm.
And in our communities, especially on the African continent, it doesn't cause anger and aggression. It's not so much the elephant in the room as it is okay, this is what it is. Let's find a way of continuing in the space we are and allowing it to be as it is without so much questioning, exploring, wanting to figure out what is it.
Mm.
And I know this is gonna sound awkward, but we have this joke, whereas we always say when we hear a loud sound, you won't find a black person going out there to figure out what the hell it is, because it's got nothing to do with me. But you always find that white guy who's like, what is that? You're like, the hell? Why do you want to find out what it is? So I'm just thinking, it's no matter where you go, if you find a black community, it's almost like if you see people running, you just run. You don't ask why you're running, you run. It's when you're further on along, you're like, why are we running though? Because it's our nature to conform or to accommodate or to do what's happening. Whereas in the whole Western perspective of why are we running? Well, let's figure that out when we get to where we're going. It could be a bit
figure
far.
out when the danger is past. I mean, so like having a conversation with the lion standing next to you and go like, your dinner is a slightly different conversation than the one. Remember that time when we heard the lion roar and we were running, because
Yes.
you will remember it instead of being the meal. And so it's also something that I think there's this word this has come to me. It's like I demand. To me, that sounds like such a Western construct. Because in an African context, for me, the word demand doesn't fit. It is we
There
are.
is no word for demand, I don't think. I mean,
it's sort of, how do we make sure things are equitable? How do we have that conversation? And so, for instance, a friend of mine, Jennifer, she was the last president or the previous president of the Mississippi Bar Association. I can imagine Mississippi has had its interesting racial history, if we can call it that. And so she made some changes in that she reached across the aisle to the Magnolia Bar, because in the 1950s there was a separate bar association created for black lawyers, and then you had the Mississippi Bar. But everybody has to pay for the Mississippi Bar to be part of it. And then you had the black bar, or the Magnolia Bar, next to that, and people did their contribution there as well. But they didn't have representation in the bar that was a compulsory bar they had to pay in, which is really weird, right? So Jennifer reached across the aisle, spoke to the heads of, or the head of the Magnolia Bar, and got people to talk together and said, okay, you know what? Let's fill the committees. Let's just take people that are willing from the Magnolia Bar and put them into positions in the Mississippi Bar. It's just a choice. Let's just do it. All right. So she made this choice. They push it through. She just implemented it, and then she had a vote at the end of the year for diversity, inclusion, women in the bar, or in practice. All these kind of committees that have sprung up over the years. All of these were ad hoc committees. So it's like they only there for a year, and then you can disband them. And they've been going on since the 60s. So she got them all approved as standing committees, so they're always going to be there. All right, with unanimous votes. So I think that's amazing achievement.
Yes, absolutely.
Except the conversation has not been had.
Which conversation?
So the conversation about the feelings.
Oh.
So you have anger on the one side that has been there when people get to a point where I say, well, you know what, I'm so angry because you cannot see that I've got pain and that I'm frustrated and I'm suffering. Now listen to me. You have to get to that point of feeling ignored. And then you don't have that conversation. You can do all the actions, but at some point that there needs to be that catharsis, that ability to say, and I feel hurt. And I'm wondering if we should not have more of those conversations. In my experience in Africa has been that if I'm upset, we can have a conversation about me being upset. And you can tell me, hey, I'm so sorry that you're feeling upset. Explain to me where it comes from, without making it me as the problem for your upset, or vice versa. We're having the conversation, we're sharing the emotions, we're talking about what is important to all of us. We're creating a shared identity. And I'm wondering, when can we have that conversation? When can we have the conversation from a Black Lives Matter perspective and from let's say, an oppressive perspective, and just talk person to person, human to human? Can you see my pain?
I think sometimes we carry somebody else's decisions and burdens without even knowing it. Like you said, there were two bar associations. They'd always been. And the question is, when were the laws constituted? Let's start from there, because there's no such thing as always been. Everything has a starting point. Everything has a shifting point. And everything has an end point. So no matter what law, tradition, or what happens in society, whether it's behavior or whether it's thought process, there is a starting point where it happened. Acknowledging that the starting point happened and you had nothing sometimes to do with where it started. It started because maybe at that point in time, the people who made the decisions thought it made sense. You cannot hold somebody further along in the conversation responsible for the starting point. You can, however, hold them responsible for upholding something without knowing what the starting point is, understanding where the shift happened and where they needed to acknowledge this shift, and then make their own decision. Because at every point, we make decisions that apply to us. So even when you look at conversations around inclusion, conversations around racism, you have to really dig deep and ask yourself, where did it start? Where is it now? What is my contribution to the conversation? Because when we start taking responsibility of our contribution towards the conversation, we make it easier for the other person to feel seen, to feel heard, and to feel like they matter. And as human beings, that's all we look for. We want to be seen, we want to be heard, and we want to feel like we matter. So all the anger that's there is based on you don't see me, or you don't hear me, or I do not matter to you. And so if there's a feeling of disgruntlement, it's obviously because somebody feels they're not being seen, heard, and they do not matter. So what can I do where I stand with the responsibility or authority or whatever it is that you have, play my part in making sure that person is seen, they heard, and they matter? Because equally so, you just have to turn the mirror around and look at your own self and say, if I felt unseen, if I felt unheard, and I felt I didn't matter, would I not react in the same way?
I think you're bringing up some interesting points, and let's pull that back to family businesses as well. What would your advice be for family businesses when they do business with people in Africa, or let's say with businesses in Africa? So let's say Western European family businesses, and vice versa. What would be your advice be for African family businesses when doing business with businesses in Europe?
I think when you walk into somebody's home, and when I say I'm using home as in it could be their business, it could be their personal space, it's a space that you are not familiar with, but it's a space that they're comfortable in and they have been inhabiting. If you have muddy boots, do you just come in with those muddy boots and say to hell with it? You don't. You first take a peek and see, okay, this is not the type of place that bring in muddy boots. Generally don't bring muddy boots into other people's spaces. You either want to clean your boots or you want to take them off in respect. Equally so, when you are going into another country, going into another continent, going into another culture, don't go in there with your muddy boots. Don't go in there with the assumption that, oh, they'll clean it up, because you don't know if they've got carpets or tiles. Don't go in there with that expectation, well, at my house we do this. This is not your house. If it was your house, then you would clean up your mess. You would figure it out yourself. But the fact that you're coming into my house, whatever that may be, take a moment to think, as I walk into this place, I must come with respect. I must come with an open heart and the ability to learn. There will always be conflict, no matter where you go. Even within the family business itself and the construct of it, you have your sibling rivalries, you have your fights between parents, you have parent-children arguments, you have triangulate, you have all sorts of emotions that are going on. All emotion has a root. There's a starting point, like I said in my previous point. There is always a starting point. If you can identify the starting point, you can identify where the shift has to happen, and you can navigate towards the end. So as you walk into somebody else's house, be mindful that there are going to be times where you're going to have conflict. And when conflict arises, ask yourself, what was the starting point? What triggered this? And if there's hostility as you walk in, look for the starting point. Why is it when I'm walking in, there's hostility? Did I walk in wrong? Was I supposed to knock on the door? Did I do something culturally wrong? Did I do something that was humanely wrong? What did I do? And acknowledging that you've done right or wrong doesn't make you a good or bad person. It just means you are acknowledging the fact, saying, oh, this is a door. It's a door. It's not going to change. It's a door. Now you have to decide whether you want to open or close the door, but acknowledge the fact that the door is there. At the end of the day, conflict will always happen, for good or for bad. Be open-minded, be aware, and have the humility to accept when sometimes the conflict starts with you. It doesn't make you right. It doesn't make you wrong. It just means that that was the starting point. There has to be a shift.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you think we can also say that all of us like to do business with people we like? It's just in Africa, it is also a form of trust.
Funny enough, I had a conversation with somebody today who said exactly what you said. So I have a business partner who I have built an incredible organization with. And we've worked together for the past 2, going on 3 years. We have never physically been in the same room together. We met online. We forged the business online. We've built the business online. And we've built the business offline in the spaces we are, and we represent each other in the spaces we are. There is an innate trust. Initially, we signed an MOU to get the organization we wanted to start going. But everything we have been through has not been covered by that MOU. That ability to show up when my partner cannot, that ability to show up on time when my partner needs me there, that ability to represent them even when they're not there and trust that they're representing me, the ability to bring their name into conversations, into rooms that they have not stepped into. It is easier to do business with people you like, people you know, and knowing means sometimes just the essence of the person, the way they speak, their mannerisms, their commitments. Do they show up when they say they're going to show up? Do they do what they promise to do? Because all those things build towards trust. When I think of my business partner, she's like my sister. Her kids call me auntie. My kids call her auntie. We've never been in the same room. I don't know if she's short, tall, skinny, big. I have no idea. She's never met me. She doesn't know either. All she knows is that she can trust me with her life, and I know I can trust her with mine. And I trust her with my reputation, which is my life, because if she goes and messes that up, there is no room I can show up in that will save me. And so you have to like, know, and trust people. And you sometimes have to trust your gut feeling. Does this person look like someone I can trust? Does this person look like someone I can work with? And sometimes we go against our gut feelings because we look at the numbers and we think this will be a good profit, or this will be a good deal. And we lose a lot more than just money. So go with your intuition. Do you feel like you can trust this person? Are they honoring the things that they said that they would honor? And continue building like that, because at some point in time, somebody will drop the ball. It happens in all relationships, in all situations. But it's everything that has happened before that one time that is going to make up for that one failure, because you know that it was probably not intentional. It was probably a mistake. And even if it was intentional, they probably were not thinking straight. And because you're family now, you just have to say, right, where do we start?
Yeah, I've just seen also with my business, as I've been building it, there is a sense of community, a sense of connection that you cannot replace with a contract. And yet in most Western businesses, we try and reduce people to what they can do and their knowledge and so on, and not to the essence of who they are. And it's a scary place. I recently listened to a TV program. Monty Don was traveling Japan, and he was talking about gardens in Japan. And one of the things he talked about was Zen gardens and ikebana, because he tried his hand at this Japanese, what's generally known as Japanese flower arranging, but is really sort of the minimalist art, I think, of flower arranging. And they have a concept called mu, and mu is not about what is there. It is about the unspoken, what is not there, what's in the gaps. So appreciating the beauty of what isn't there. And I think so for me, that has an analogy in the way that we do business. Can we appreciate that which is not in the contract? Can we appreciate that which is difficult to quantify? The beauty of the person, the passion they have for their work, the passion they have for the connection with a fellow human being, the way that a team sometimes, just like a small birds, just automatically, intuitively know how to work with each other, having been through all the conflicts and the things before, those things. I personally believe that real leadership is when we can see the gaps, when you look at those gaps, and we can see what needs to fill the gap where necessary, and appreciate that which isn't written down and express that. I think that is where we start getting real trust, real connection, real love coming back into businesses.
Absolutely. And I just a random thought that crossed my mind. On building like no trust, Siri and Alexa are female voices. Why is that? Is it because we're familiar with, and we trust female voices?
The only thing for me when it comes to female voices, when thinking about it, is it's hard to sound aggressive.
You have not met an angry woman then.
Oh, I've had my fair share of angry women in my life. I'm saying in general, we associate female voices not with aggression.
True.
Maybe that's it.
True.
And unless you ask your Alexa, like this one, Alexa, fire photon torpedoes.
She doesn't know what the hell you're talking about. She's like, what?
Well, she has the option of firing photon torpedoes and lasers and phasers and all these little eggs, these sort of like Easter eggs that have been hidden inside the Alexa system. I don't know if there's any in Google or in Apple Home, but yeah, I know that for Alexa.
Interesting. I think how it ties into our conversation is that there are certain voices, there are certain people, there are certain demeanors that make us feel safe, that make us feel like we can trust them. And especially in family businesses, I think what we trust the most about family businesses, without even knowing, the same way we trust Siri and Alexa, is because when we know it's family owned, even at the back of our mind, we trust that we're going to get a good product. We are more trusting of family businesses than we are of what we would see as corporates. We have even coined that corporates are greedy, yet a lot of corporates are family-owned businesses. And when we take them to task, then we dig deeper to look at their ownership and say, if this family owns this, why would they allow this to happen in our communities? So family businesses are the starting point of all commerce. They are our check and balance of what is good and bad, because we can make them accountable. That's why we look to them for philanthropy. We look to them to do CSR and ESG, because we're not dealing with it as an entity. We're dealing it as a family. That's why their family values become important. That's why their family vision for the future, which reassures the communities they operate in that they will have jobs. It reassures the communities they operate in that they will have services or they will have products. At the end of the day, when I can go outside my house to a grocery store and see familiar brands on my shelf, I just don't see those brands. I see those families. And sometimes we go out of our way to support certain brands because they belong to families that we believe are doing things that we want to be aligned with. And so the family business conversation is going to be a never ending one. What has become more important is for now family businesses not to be afraid to be called family businesses, because we found that the label of family business, sometimes people feel like it's unprofessional and so forth. But what people don't realize, that is not what you see when you think family business. You think, I like, know, and trust. I can go in and buy this bread because it's from the bakery. I played with the kids. I know their grandkids. You feel like you want to support them because you know them. And so every day, even the branding itself, when we think of brands, they've been built around liking, knowing, and trusting. What do you like, know, and trust about a brand, if not the fact that we know what their values are? We know what they support, what they put money into. We know that when the spokesperson for this brand stands, it's somebody that we're familiar with. I mean, when we think Amazon, yes, we can go Amazon all day long, but we think Bezos. We think the guy who started his business in a garage. Essentially, we don't see the billionaire that is put on all these lists. We see this guy who sat in a garage, who had a vision, who changed the world. And we align with that and we support that. And so without even knowing it, we're not supporting the billionaire. We're supporting the guy who started with that sign in the back that he'd handwritten, and he had books and he was saying, I want to change the world. And we rallied toward him.
Well, thank you for joining us today, Tsitsi. It's been a very interesting and very diverse conversation. I loved every minute of it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it. As always, talking to you gets all those creative juices flowing.
Fantastic. I'm glad for that, because it's always great having a conversation with you and exchanging ideas. Again, thank you for being here today.
I do appreciate it.
I think what struck me most is that we talked about society on paper. Is that which is on paper the real society we live in, or those tactile or less so elements of culture? So what is written in law is not actually what gets it done, especially in countries where personal trust has become more of a currency than the legal letter of the law. If the laws are not enforced, how do you create trust other than through the relationships? And who do you trust more than your family? It's an interesting concept to think about, I think, in that who do we trust and why do we trust them? Is it the legal aspects of the contract that we've negotiated, or is the personal relationships that we build in business? If profit is more than just the number on the page, but also the relationships we gain, what kind of profit would you like to go for? What kind of rewards do you think is best for the relationships we build in business? Now go out there, be exponential, and do something nice for someone else. You can find us on the web by going to podcast.exponentially.me. We will also find additional media resources and some amazing insights.